talk about the fit of Monahan in the lineup and what he can do in the faceoff circle and how he'll fit on the power play. The other thing that is very important to note in this deal, which I think brought more value to Montreal, is his salary, how he fits into the cap. And at a $1.9 million cap hit, Jeff, this is not an addition that completely takes the Winnipeg Jets out of being a player for potentially more. What do you make of like where the Jets are right now with Monahan in the lineup and what might be next for Kevin Cheveldayoff?
Couple things. One, the timing is perfect because you get more time to acclimatize Sean Monahan into your system, to build that chemistry with his line mates instead of just kind of forcing him in there at the trade deadline. So you do have those weeks in advance to help with that process. And then to your point, Huss, I mean, this was a situation because of his salary, as you mentioned, under $2 million cap hit. This is a guy that you can add other pieces. That was always, built in with, Sean Monahan in the trade deadline list that we saw across various publications was always, if you want to add him, you can add somebody else. He's not one of those guys that you got to win the lottery. And then you kind of hope the pieces fall into place. The Jets now, with again, a fair cap hit, have room. They have room if they want to go after a defenseman, if they want to go after a top six winger, they can do that. If they want to go in a bottom six winger, they just have options. And I think that's a really important part. And really, with Sean Monahan now getting him into the lineup, getting him into the mix, they're going to be able to see they're going to have a better idea leading up to the trade deadline what it is they actually need, right? Now they have, you're kind of working on the fly. When Mark Scheifele was out, obviously Mark Scheifele's coming back in, but even with him coming back in, you were always wanting to add to your depth at center. Now that you've done that, you can see what your team looks like, and you can make better educated guesses on what your team needs. And so, maybe you need nothing. Maybe he comes in and this is what you want and you're adding more depth piece. Maybe you come in here and you look at your lineup and you all of a sudden think, oh, what if we added another top end winger? Look at the options that we had, right? I think any adding of players now down the line here is going to result in probably a guy in the lineup going out, but there are some options out there for sure. And I think when you're looking now, you're looking at your chemistry, but I also think you're looking at what it's going to take for your team to do a long, grueling playoff matchup. You're looking for experience. You're looking for, in some instances, size. So a lot of that, because you got Sean Monahan when you got him, you're able to see how those pieces fit into place. And if you need to correct something, even you have that time leading up until obviously the trade deadline come up here in a couple of weeks.
We'll be talking about the blue line. Chris Tanev still being out there and the price that might be out there. I know Elliot Friedman speculating, said that this was just purely his opinion, that he thought that the Winnipeg Jets were one of the teams that were quite interested in Chris Tanev. And if anything happens, I sort of lean that way, like an addition, on the blue line that strengthens them from, potentially a player like a Tanev that could play top 4 minutes and really add something to the blue line. It allows you to get deeper if another player gets hurt. You've got a couple more guys. Of course, Villy's going to be available. But Jeff in chat asks, what are the odds that Rutger McGroarty joins the team after the NCAA season ends? Could be a big playoff addition. Count me in the camp that expects Rutger to sign and expects Rutger to be a player potentially in the lineup in the playoffs. And again, that's a long ways away, but we have seen this before. He's absolutely killing it right now in Michigan. I know Ken came on a couple weeks ago and we were talking about this and dropped the 90% number that he thinks that he'd be there. And I think he was even hedging his bet, was that sure. McGroarty's such an intriguing...
We talked about this last week. I think he's in it too. I think it's a slam dunk. I think it would be ridiculous if he wasn't. I think he'll be afforded all opportunity to be part of this group coming into the playoffs. Like, why wouldn't you? I mean, that's what good teams do. And guess what? Winnipeg Jets are a good team. And if you have a guy who's lighting it up in the college ranks and is built like a man and is ready to, take some of that momentum into I don't want to say an easier college season, but Michigan, last time I checked, isn't going to be competing for that Frozen Four. There might be some good opportunity here by the end of the year for him to come in and slide in. But I'm with Kenny, and I said that last week, and I have a good feeling that Rick Bowness feels exactly the same way, that this is a guy that you want in your lineup. You want the energy in your lineup. You want some of that, knowing nothing, but what was that? What was it? Jacob Trouba, young, dumb, and stupid. You kind of want a little bit of that in there. And that's not to be insulting to Rutger McGroarty, because by no means is he unintelligent or doesn't know the game by any stretch. But I do think he would be a massive piece to the puzzle. And if this guy's going to be your future, might as well give him a taste. No one's suggesting you necessarily make him, a top 6 guy per se, but I'm not ruling it out either. I think you let the guy come in, see how he, gels and fits. And if he's rocking and rolling, why not? There's a guy who adds scoring, he adds, size. He's built for the playoffs, despite what, obviously is no resume in the NHL just yet.
No, and listen, we've seen this happen before. Young players come in at the end of their NCAA season, get a chance to show what they can do and make a real impact. And I mean, this is a guy that ticks off all the boxes, especially for that time of the year. And if nothing else, it puts, not that guys haven't been pulling their weight, but puts everybody on notice that there's another guy that's hungry as hell to get in that lineup. And, you got to be able to take care of your own business, or you might get lapped, and you might find yourself eating popcorn as opposed to being in the lineup. So Rutger McGroarty, very, very much on the table moving forward. Just quick thoughts. Have you heard anything about Tanev? I was surprised a little bit that, I mean, and maybe I'm just particularly high on Tanev. Like, when you consider the price paid for Monahan and the price paid for Elias Lindholm, that, we've heard it reported that the ask for Calgary is a second rounder and some sort of a prospect. I mean, I'll be honest, if I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff and that is out there right now, depending on the prospect, and I guess that's a huge caveat, because I think the Winnipeg Jets want to make sure they keep their top prospects moving forward to get a deal done. But obvious Winnipeg would be interested in. You hearing anything on that? And what do you think it would take to get Tanev if the Jets were going to be the team that succeeded? Because apparently there's lots of interest in him. Why wouldn't there be?
Yeah, and if I read a little bit about him, and he's not, from what I understand, he's not even necessarily like itching to go to a playoff team. Like he would be just as, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but from what I understand, just as happy going to a development team that he could play a role in. So I mean that's
get me out of Calgary.
I guess, like, I don't know, like, or not exactly a guy you want to add to your playoff roster. Of course you do, and so anyway, to answer your question, I had heard shortly after the trade for Monahan that the Jets were circling back on. But I mean, that's just, of course the Jets are circling back on him. I mean, they've identified as wanting to up their to upgrade their defense, and Tanev is certainly a guy who would do that, and is built for the playoffs, and is mean and nasty and all those things. And certainly Brandon Tanev, I imagine, gave him the scouting report about Winnipeg and whatnot. So, I mean, but it's going to be up to him, of course. I mean, if that's the asking price, the part I would be focusing on, or if I was a Jets fan concerned about the asking price, would be the prospect. Obviously, second round pick isn't a bad one. Maybe the second round pick that the Jets have of Montreal's can be turned into that, because that one's looking like he could be a nice second round pick, because the Jets second round pick, assuming they have one this year, I haven't checked that, but wouldn't be great. Be more like a third pick. But yeah, I mean, I certainly think that's an option. I do think the Jets are looking to add more. I do think they're going to, you heard some names out there. There's some names out there on the draft board I'm sure the Jets would like. I've tossed out names. Like, I just think Cam Fowler would be a great pick here. It would cost more money here. I just think he'd be a great guy to add to the blue line. I've heard some stuff about, like, more of a bottom six winger, like a guy like Jordan Greenway comes up. I've heard that kind of being talked about in circles, and there's names out there, right? There's lots of guys that kind of fit that bill. And the other thing too, and I was talking to a few people about this yesterday, who knows what Kevin Cheveldayoff might have up his sleeve, because we bring up the Paul Stastny trade, and that wasn't even an option before. So what we've noted, even if you look at last season, picking up guys like Nino Niederreiter and Nemestikov, didn't prove to help all that much when it came to a playoff push, but it certainly helped their roster this season. So I'm curious what other players are out there with 1 year left on their deal per se, or maybe, guys that they think they could sign. So I think it's going to be an interesting few weeks. I don't think that the Jets are done, whether it's Tanev or somebody else in the blue line or another forward. I do think the Jets, continue to add here because I just don't think they're done.
Yeah, well, the one thing I'll say about last year's deadline, I mean, the push once you got to the playoffs, obviously we know what happened. But, I mean, if you think back to that last month or so of the season, both of those guys played big roles, and the Jets were essentially in the playoffs the second that they made that trade.
Because didn't just play roles; they set the bar for play in the last 6 weeks of the last 6 weeks of the year.
As far as the push went, they certainly were big parts of that. If you haven't already, folks, hit that thumbs up, and welcome to everybody new that's finding us. If you haven't already, make sure you've hit that red subscribe button. We're here every Monday to Friday, live at 1 p.m. Central. Podcast available right after the show. Search Winnipeg Sports Talk wherever you get your favorite pods, and subscribe there as well. I guess just wrapping this up, Jeff, what is going to be interesting, getting right into it tomorrow, is how things look. And listen, I don't think we can judge based on the first game as to how that Perfetti Ehlers combination works or the power play. It might take a little bit, but certainly he's going to be given the keys to being a big part of that number one power play unit, but also playing with Ehlers and Perfetti. And as I mentioned earlier in the program, for folks that have been banging the drum to get Cole on the ice more and Nikolai Ehlers on the ice more, I think I would expect that they'll be pleasantly, maybe not necessarily surprised, but they'll like the developments. I think this is going to mean more of those players, especially if they can get off to a good start together.
Yeah, I think that is a little bit of a recipe to, how would you say it, restructure the lines the way people think they are mostly, right? And you can make the argument that the Lowry line was the second line, obviously before all the injuries, and he got upgraded. But I do think this is an opportunity to get Perfetti more minutes. I thought there would have, you didn't pick up a Sean Monahan. I was kind of surprised that you didn't see some reworking of the third and second line to maybe get him more minutes. And obviously, Rick Bowness addressed, that not long ago. I think he was leaving the part out where he didn't quite trust Cole Perfetti. Like there are parts that are on Cole Perfetti. It's not just about how the game flow, the way the game works as far as penalties goes. He doesn't kill penalties, that kind of stuff. There's obviously a want to put on the Lowry line ahead of that line. Now, does that change this line? Does adding a Sean Monahan to that line change it? I don't think it's going to necessarily change overnight. I think there's going to be a little bit of obviously an adjustment period for Monahan, but if that chemistry can grow, I don't see why that wouldn't eclipse, that third line that is, again, relied on. I think it's going to come down to is a trust factor. Does Rick Bowness trust that second line, if you will, to play against the other team's, one of their top two lines and be defensively responsible and also be offensively productive? I mean, there's a little bit of a point here, right? Like you put a line like Adam Lowry's line against one of the other team's top two lines, and you're going to get the other team is going to play Mark Scheifele's line against one of their top two lines. So that would allow for, skilled players like Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti to be up theoretically against lesser competition. So you're seeing the results based on some of the strategy here. I think what Rick Bowness probably needs to see, and this is, Captain Obvious, but I think he needs to see that responsibility in, the defensive end to warrant more minutes than his shutdown trio. And so I think once, if that can happen here in the next few weeks, then we're probably talking about Sean Monahan being the second line. Until then, I don't know even, I get that fans want more time for Cole Perfetti, but the Jets are up there in the standings and aren't exactly doing bad things. So, the way it's going now, I think it will remain that way. But I think there's always, and I mean, whether Sean Monahan is on that line or not, there's always an opportunity to prove to Rick Bowness that you deserve more ice time, that you belong in these situations. And I think that adding a guy like Sean Monahan to that line just helps out those other two wingers in making their case to the head coach.
Yeah, with you. Listen, the Adam Lowry line is not going to lose any of its importance. And I could also make an argument that the fourth line maybe steps up a little bit more now that Vladimir Mestikov is there with what he's done for the club. Bottom line is the team's a lot deeper right now. There'll be competition for minutes. But if you are a Perfetti or an Ehlers fan that's been hoping they got more time at 5-on-5, I think there's a pretty darn good chance that that happens.